Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished media representatives, welcome to the online workshop titled Media Ethics and Self-Regulation in the Digital Age, organized by Ministry of Culture and Media of the Republic of Serbia. My name is Zoran Stanojević and I will moderate this workshop. We are honored and excited for today's opportunity to talk about this subject, considering the increasing number of players in media space. Social media and networks have a great impact on evaluation of content. We all have to adjust to new market rules, but at the same time, we have to maintain established values and ethics in our journalism, and self-regulation is one of the most important mechanisms. I would like to ask Mrs. Maja Zarić, Head of Unit for International Cooperation, European Integration and Projects in the field of media, to address us in front of the Ministry of Culture and Media and to open today's workshop. Mrs. Zarić, please take the mic.
Hvala Zorane. Dobar dan svima. Dozvolite mi da vam poželim dobrodošlicu u ime Ministarstva kulture i informisanja na današnju radionicu. Veliko mi je zadovoljstvo da se danas nalazim u vašem društvu i čast. Zapravo današnja radionica se sprovodi kao naša obaveza u okviru akcionog plana za poglavlje 23 i našem procesu pristupanja Evropskoj uniji. Zadatak nam je dakle da jačamo kapacitete svih aktera na tržištu medija, odnosno u oblasti medije i informisanja, što smo sa zadovoljstvom danas i učinili. Tako da kada smo nekako promišljali o tome kako panel treba da izgleda, shvatili smo upravo da trebamo da uzmemo u obzir činjenicu da tradicionalni, da kažemo, akteri na medijskom tržištu današnje medijsko tržište dele sa novim medijima, sa društvenim medijima i sa nekim novim akterima koji dolaze iz oblasti informacionih i komunikacionih tehnologija. U skladu sa tehnološkim napretkom koji je zaista najbrži, da kažemo, u ovom sadašnjem trenutku, a svi predviđaju da će se još samo ubrzavati, nekako pravni okviri redovni su ti koji kaskaju za tim tehnološkim napretkom, te u samom, da kažemo, medijskom okruženju koje je ovako izazovno danas i bit će sve izazivnije, zaista je neophodno držati se visokih etičkih standarda i u tome nam najviše pomaže samoregulacija. Trudili smo se da uzmemo u obzir ove činjenice i da tako sačinimo, da kažemo, intervencije, odnosno da pozovemo paneliste. Zaista se zahvaljujemo svima vama koji ste danas sa nama i želimo vam produktivnu diskusiju. Ja ću sigurno uživati i puno toga naučiti, a nadam se i vi. Hvala vam najlepše.
Thank you, Mrs. Zarić. I would like to introduce our panelists now. They are Isabelle de Curzon, Director of Editorial Office International Department, Hola and Hello. Aidan White, Founder and Honorary President of the Ethical Journalism Network. Gordana Novaković, General Secretary of the Press Council in Serbia. And Kathleen Stewart, Public Policy Manager, Content Regulation at Meta. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today and share your knowledge and experience. All panelists will have their 20 minutes presentation, after which we will open the discussion and answer the questions. Please send your questions in the chat box so we can answer them in a timely manner. I would like to ask now Mrs. Stewart to start with her presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak today. It's quite an honor to be talking along with these panelists. And so I work at Meta in content regulation. I've been there about 18, 19 months now, and my work really focuses on understanding global regulatory trends, trying to get alignment, and really how answering the question of how do we preserve freedom of expression and human rights as we move into a world where content regulation is, or online, the space becomes more and more regulated. Prior to that, I worked for the UK government, and then before that I worked at the UK regulator Ofcom. So I have many, many years in the world of regulation, both statutory, self and co-regulation. I'm just going to share my screen. And check, does that work correctly? Can I get a thumbs up? Yeah. Right, great, thank you. Just kind of when we look at the themes in regulation, one of the kind of issues that keeps emerging is there is just the fundamental difference between the types of content services, and it makes it very difficult to apply traditional broadcasting or one-size-fits-all regulation across all the providers. I've got a little chart here that goes through the differences, but I think that going from one end to the other, you know, the traditional broadcaster has full editorial responsibility, where a user-generated platform really has no editorial control over the content itself, because users are uploading and publishing that content, and it's really at very high volume. So whilst the content is subject to community standards and guidelines, there's no control of what appears on the platform as it's initially envisaged. So the key considerations when we look at regulation at the moment is really this primary concern about how you balance that really difficult question of freedom of expression versus the need for safety, privacy, and other fundamental rights. There are issues that emerge about the platforms and the social media networks. They're global, and the issues that appear can very often be localized issues. There's the issues in relation to what is private on these platforms versus what is public, what is kind of organic content by users versus what is paid content. And the threats just kind of continue to evolve. They constantly change in this space. And so because of that, we really need to consider how we deal with the volume, scalability, and speed. And then, you know, as I said at the top, you know, there's really just, it's a diverse space. There's a huge range of products, services, and users communities within the online media space, which makes any kind of self-regulation really, really challenging. There are two themes that emerge. One is a systems-based approach that really focuses on the architecture, the policies, the processes, what tools that the platform might have in place. Those tend to look at safety in a kind of holistic, systematic level. It does create a lot of flexibility to iterate and improve and do the ever-changing threats. And we think that this systematic approach is probably better able to balance those issues around free speech and expression versus safety, privacy. And it aligns with kind of global industry standards, such as under the Global Network Initiative. On the other side of that, I'd say systems-based approaches are appearing in things like the European DSA. It's appearing in the UK's online safety bill. So these approaches are coming. You also then have the content-based approach, which very much focuses on individual pieces of content that could be harmful and looks at addressing safety like one piece at a time. And this really comes from the traditional model of regulation, where broadcasters had one piece of content at a time. It tends to focus then on takedown and notice actions from governments. There can be issues with international human rights law because there's no international benchmark for these. And it really incentivizes platforms to increase efforts on illegal content and decrease on the legal content that may also be harmful. When I kind of analyze various codes of practice and self-regulation models, these are the themes that appear in terms of the principles behind them. One is that freedom of expression, that really need to recognize that balance of content restriction and protection of freedom of expression and other fundamental human rights. And that is clearly a very challenging and difficult balance that it strikes to be achieved. The recognition of the global and the cross-border nature and the importance and value of cross-border communications. Regulations that have flexibility, that really shows that there are limitations in content moderation technology, but also allow companies to flexibly innovate, that best matches their risk profiles and technical limitations and resources. So I think the issue here is that very often regulatory models go after size, but actually you need to look at the nature of a service as well, that there are some high-risk services that are quite small, and then the sort of lower risk services, but quite large. And so there is a balance there. Focusing on systems, policies, processes, really a systems-based approach is because of the volume, is the only one that seems to be kind of proportionate. And I think that's the other thing is taking into account the severity and prevalence of any kind of harmful content. Incentives for accountability, so measures that incentivize platforms to take voluntary proactive steps whilst, not creating a threat of legal liability if they do so. And then,
Kathleen, just for a second, I mean,
yeah.
we don't see any changes of the slides if you're changing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. I was just going and was in
Never
my
mind.
phone.
It's okay. Just continue, please.
Thank you very much. And then, the thing is just that maximizing the opportunities for international cooperation and cooperation, and human rights laws really should form the basis of any content moderation rules or regulations. And that would take into consideration the kind of global content governance and standard setting framework initiatives that already take place. I'm really sorry. I wasn't changing the slides. So some of the best practice principles that are out there are things like the UN Guiding Principle on Human Rights, which encompasses the human rights as defined by the International Bill of Human Rights. The GNI principles, which look to give direction and guidance to the tech industry, and again, to advance human rights globally. You have the Santa Clara principles, which outline a minimum level of transparency and accountability. And then, the voluntary principles on sexual exploitation and abuse as developed by the Five Eyes Governments Network. All right. I'm just briefly going to go through this slide and then kind of go to the next ones. When it works, when self and co-regulation works, it really happens as a result of whole of society collaboration and consultation. So when governments, industries, civil society, news organizations, and the public work together to find system-wide solutions. A lot of online harm is a whole of society problem and can only be addressed with whole of society collaboration. That dialogue kind of allows for better information in terms of policy positions, but also finding kind of appropriate positions for countries, identifying problems. But it also builds legitimacy. I think there is a huge issue in lack of trust across the board. People don't trust governments, they don't trust industry, they don't trust news media. And so it's difficult for any one initiative to gain legitimacy unless you have this whole of society collaboration. So these are some examples of collaboration, but I'm going to go straight to examples. This slide might be a bit small, but I'll just talk a bit about some codes and best practice frameworks that are currently out there or currently developing. And a lot of them are kind of really emerging in the last year or two. So the Australian practice of disinformation, code of practice on disinformation and misinformation. This was a self-regulatory code that really built on the EU Code of Practice of Disinformation. And what is quite unique about this code is it has a number of scalable measures. So it has a number of outcomes that are considered to be beneficial in this space. So like an outcome one is combating misinformation, disinformation. Outcome 2 is disrupting monetization and advertising initiatives. Outcome 3 is combating inauthentic behavior, and so forth. And then companies, according to their size, their scale, their risk profile, make commitments for specific practices against each of these outcomes. And then at the end of each year, produce an annual report. So this is an example of where you have the scalability according to the nature of the service and the risk profile alongside a transparency model. That was built on, a lot of the principles were built on the EU Code of Disinformation. Another one that is appearing is the Digital Trust and Safety Best Practice Framework. This is an industry-led initiative for best practices with trust and safety, and they're looking for self-assessment and then independent evaluation against the practices. And those practices look at the holistic approach. So rather than looking at content itself, it looks at the whole process and does the whole process support good outcomes. And it's under pillars of like product development, product governance, product enforcement, transparency, and then the continuous cycle of improvement. Does the platform have a process to take these inputs in and continually improve and continually, continually iterate and evolve, because harms and threats continually iterate and evolve. And then another one that is developing is the New Zealand NetSafe Code, which is similar to the Australian Code of Practice on Disinformation, where it's looking at outcomes and scalability of measures. But what is different about this one is that actually it'll be a co-regulatory, not self-regulatory, because there will be powers to hold signatories accountable. That one is in its consultation phase, and I think should be finalized by the end of this year, if not early next year. And then I'm just going to look at some of the kind of common themes and drivers that have been going on in terms of what is driving calls for online news regulation. And I think one of them is there is a kind of call from academia and journalist organizations for journalism reforms in themselves, that in particular sort of emphasizes that the business model itself encourages journalists to create sensationalist content or fake news or whatever, or generate stuff that will generate clicks and eyeballs. There is a narrative out there that social media creates polarization. And this one is particularly interesting because there's quite a lot of research that has shown that there's actually no straightforward link between social media use and polarization. Because polarization was on the rise before Facebook existed, and in some places it's actually decreased when internet use has increased. And so this is an area where more research is clearly needed, but there's quite a lot of research out there, and I'm kind of looking down at my notes. There's like a study from Stanford that shows that actually polarization is higher amongst groups that are less likely to use social media. There's another EU study that actually shows wherever you get your news from, it doesn't matter in terms of there's no direct link between that and polarization. I'm aware of another study that is going on in Holland right now, looking at the issue of why does this resonate when the evidence doesn't show polarization? Why is it resonate with people that it does? But alongside this, what we do at MESA is we kind of work with a process where we remove content if it's harmful and breaches our guidelines. We reduce content that may not necessarily violate community standards, but may be harmful in other ways, such as misinformation, and that's where we work with fact checkers. And then we inform, and so we will label content like that. The other narrative that is going on is that, the platforms are killing news and content providers. And we actually support regulation that would help build the relationships between tech and news organizations. And we currently support news organizations in a number of ways. And I think there's a lot of kind of narrative that may not necessarily be accurate in that regard. But for example, at Meta, we don't actually, we allow news publishers to publish, distribute, monetize, interact with viewers at no cost. And we kind of create a number of business tools to help them monetize and the traffic that they get from Facebook. And we also have kind of informed treatments with supporting subscription models and those sorts of things. In some countries, we've launched a news tab where we have then a direct relationship where we are acquiring news content for the news tab, and that is paid for. In addition to that, we have, I think in 2020, it was 100 million that we gave to supporting journalism and journalist activities. And so we have training programs for journalists. We also have a journalist safety program where we have journalist registration and where staff journalists and freelancers can register and benefit from additional safety features, and with training and tips that kind of allow journalists to be safe and secure, and also to protect them and their contacts, because that's another issue there. So yeah, but those are the kind of the themes that are coming up in terms of drivers for news regulation. And I've actually lost track of time. I'm not sure how long I've spoken for, but I'm going to stop there, and because I think this is probably a good point for discussion, both the drivers and actually the existing codes of practice.
Thank you, Caitlin. So just switch off the presentation, so we'll get the screen back. Okay. Now I'm inviting Mr. White to begin his presentation. Aidan, please take the microphone.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks very much for the opportunity to speak on these issues. And thanks very much for Kathleen for introducing some of these issues. I have to say, I have to immediately respond to what she says, because these are questions I might raise later, but I'd like her to sort of think about them, which is that there was nothing in this presentation which encouraged me to think that the technology companies, particularly Meta, formerly Facebook, are looking at the problems that are created by their own business model, and that how that business model itself is contributing to the mass of the problem that is being dealt with. And I think that to make a presentation about all of the difficulties and so on, but not to make one reference at all to the business that is driving Meta and other large companies seems to me that something's missing. Secondly, on the question of research, which I was very interested to hear, the importance of research and so on. And I was grateful that Kathleen brought that up. I think, and many journalists might say, well, there is a question here about research when we have had information in the very recent past that Meta, that is Facebook, has actually been suppressing its own research internally, which indicated that its work and its content was actually damaging young people. So, I think it's very, very important to have consistency in the approach here so that we can build trust in trying to understand what the problems really are if we're going to be able to seek solutions to them. I just wanted to make those comments because I think an immediate response to what Kathleen said, I think is necessary, particularly if we're going to have a serious discussion, as is outlined on your agenda, about digital values. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much. I'm the president of the Ethical Journalism Network, but I've formerly been a member of the British Press Council over the years. I've had a lot to do with self-regulation, and I've represented journalists for around 40 years. And so I'm really quite aware of all of these issues. What I'd like to do is to make a presentation, if I can, which actually is more positive in seeking to identify how journalists and others and policymakers can try to create a better atmosphere in support of the work that's done by press councils and self-regulators and so on, but also perhaps to point towards a question of how we create trusted brands in news media and journalism for the future, which would be quite useful. So if I can just share my screen, I want to make a presentation which really looks at this question. That's right. What I really think is very important for us to recognize is that, you know, we are in the midst of an open information crisis. And I think it's really important to try to understand the nature of that crisis. There is no question at all. We may be arguing about who is responsible for it, but the public sphere is polarized. It is fragmented and it's increasingly politicized. And that creates enormous problems for people who are trying to get access to useful and reliable information. And that has created a crisis of public trust because of problems of disinformation. And it's also created, and I think this gets back to this question about business interests as against public interests in terms of quality of content in the public information sphere, a lack of responsibility in the use and development of technology. And I think that's something that we have to look at. And of course, for journalists and for news media, there is the crisis of sustainability, a collapse of business models, less investment in journalism, which has created enormous problems. We see that media today are under pressure, more under pressure than they've ever been. And I have spent more than 50 years in journalism, and I've witnessed over the years how there has been the increasing power, increasingly centers of power of influence over media. We still have populism and political spin, which influences media. We still have the platforms, which are increasingly the drivers of whether or not news media are promoted and whether or not they're taken up and so on. So corporate power has become ever more significant in terms of influencing how media work. And then, of course, there's the question of social networks or social media and the importance of citizens' voice. Now, I don't think all of this is negative. I think citizens' voice is a very powerful, democratizing force in journalism. And I'm one of those who really welcomed the fact that journalism is no longer the citadel of powerful establishment elites. It's not. It's now increasingly driven by the influence that we have from the grassroots, from our readers and our viewers and so on. And I think that's an important positive change. But media is under pressure in a way that we've never seen. So we've seen massive closures, massive pressures being put on editorial rooms and so on. we also have the political challenge, and the political challenge is seen everywhere in Europe, particularly in the Balkans, but also around other parts of Europe. Even in the United States, we saw over the last few years how the rise of fact-free populism has contributed to diminishing public trust in information, in public information, and of course, the media have suffered as a result of that as well. And we've also had the problem of hate speech has been increasingly an issue that's been we've had to deal with, and a whole range of issues that that media have to deal with sort of indicate how hate speech remains one of the primary concerns for journalists, and we have to sort of work out in this new information environment, in this new landscape, how we are able to deal with that and to meet that head on. So in the Balkans, I would say there's a particular, there are particular problems. There is intolerance and populist politics, which is very often driving the news agenda. I've done a lot of work in many of the Balkan countries over the years, since the 1990s, and I've seen how media have been very often the targets of sort of political pressure, and how there has been inside media very often ownership issues and corruption issues which have contributed to these problems as well. One of the issues that is coming up is that internet business models are undermining core values of public interest journalism, which is really a sort of, again, gets me back to the very first point I was making in my introduction. So I think one of the things we are looking for is, how do we provide a new vision of media and journalism for the digital age, and particularly how do we do that in the area of regulation of journalism and so on. So one of the issues we have to deal with is disinformation, fake news, and we've seen how during the pandemic that sort of issue of misinformation or disinformation is frightening and potentially life-threatening when information is taken up, which works against public health and welfare. So the major issue that I feel that we have to deal with is a question of propaganda, and we have to see how this encourages people to adopt views often dangerous and abusive, but without understanding their intention. And this is the polarizing impact, I think. And there is much evidence to show that this polarization, can be laid at the door of the tech companies and social media. So it's a massive question when we have the very roots and essence of democracy being undermined by the information landscape that's been created. So the question is, one of the issues is, I think very important for journalists, and the next few things I want to say, I want to sort of really direct towards journalists, is that we need to understand how algorithms tend to amplify the extremes. They amplify sensationalism. And I think that the idea that media have become a problem because it's a sensationalist coming as a critique from the social media companies is very interesting, when actually the extremes of sensationalism, rumor, hate, and falsehood really are being generated from the social media companies themselves. And very often we are seeing this idea that a fact-based information, whether it comes from distinguished academic researchers or whether it comes from well-informed journalists, is discarded in a world where strongly held opinions are used just to counter facts and so on. And this really causes a real sort of problem in trying to get important public messages across. One of the big issues that I feel is very strong is that although, and I'm pleased to hear it, that big tech companies are doing more and they're very interested in all of the codes and so on that is going on, the evidence is over the last 10 years is the big technology companies have been extremely slow to respond to public concerns, and they are reluctant to be accountable. We've seen both in Europe and the United States how, in fact, the social media companies have literally been dragged to the table in order to be made accountable for what's been going on. Their failure to anticipate the consequences of their business model and the way that they work has led to now increasing policy makers' concern, not just in the United States, but and in Britain, but actually across Europe and many other parts of the world. So there are issues there which really, I think, have to be faced. So how do media do it? How do we protect the values of building trust in the information through journalism? I think that what we have to do is we have to make sure that journalists stick to their 5 core values, which are accuracy and fact-based information, independence, editorial independence in the way they work, impartiality in the processes that they use to gather their stories, humanity, of course, no hate speech and no incitement to violence, and of course, accountability through good self-regulation processes. Above all, I think one of the things in media we have to live with, and the social media companies that don't live with, is that we in media have to take our time before we make before we publish our information. We have to do that because in order to be ethical, you need to take time. Ethics require reflection. We need to think about the content. We need to think about its impact. When you have business models which are delivering information without any thought at all about the consequences of the content that is being delivered, then I think that's potentially damaging to the public information space, and we're seeing the consequences of that now. So media need to take their time. They need to avoid information cheats and people who are deceptive in their handling of the facts. But above all, we need to slow down in order to make sure that the messages we deliver are ethical and they're reliable, and above all, they're trustworthy. And sometimes, when we're exposing disinformation, one of the problems we have is we find that sometimes media and journalists, they pick up information from social media, which is clickbait or rage bait, or maybe even a hoax, and sometimes it's satire, but they have to beware that just because a story grabs your attention, it doesn't make it newsworthy, and it requires better attention. So we've developed a sort of 6-point checklist for journalists on how to avoid disinformation and how to sort of deal with that problem. So the question of identifying primary sources and testing them against original documents, the verification of URLs, the author and date of original story, the use of verification tools, fact checkers and technology that helps to verify the sources of information, seeking independent corroboration and looking for expert opinion, as well, of course, as be wary of press releases and information that comes from self-interested sources. All of these are sort of very important, but these are necessary as part of the sort of what I would call the sort of the basic tools that journalists need to be able to identify what's trustworthy and what isn't trustworthy in information online. So in building trust, I think journalists and news media and policymakers need to create a news environment that can be delivered through ethical branding. And we see that we're in times of crisis today, people, when they are faced with a crisis, where do they go for their information? They don't go to Twitter immediately, or they don't go to Facebook or Meta. They will tend, if in a moment of crisis, they will tend to go to trusted brands. And we see that with the spiking of take-up of brands like the BBC or the Guardian or other main news media when crisis arises. But in order for us to build trusted brands, inside media, we have to do more to be transparent, to show some humility, show a lack of conceit, and to admit our mistakes, and above all, to stick to our ethics. Now, finally, I want to sort of, if I can, just spend a moment or two talking about an initiative which I think is very important, which is the Journalism Trust Initiative, which was launched a couple of years ago. This is a vision of regulation of journalism really for the age we live in. And it's come up with an internationally agreed set of journalism standards. And it's a form of certification of trusted branding in journalism, which is open to everyone, from individual bloggers to global news media. And it basically works on the basis that in order to create public trust, news media need a public profile which is based on trust and transparency. And the Journalism Trust Initiative has created a structure for public interest journalism that is sustainable and accountable. And I should say it's been supported by major media organizations, including the European Broadcasting Union, The Guardian, the Agence France Presse, Reuters, and others are supporting it. And it's a voluntary self-regulating benchmark of good practice for news media. As I say here, it's got 120 media and journalism support groups, and it is a real attempt at cross-border self-regulation. And that is one of the major problems. We'll hear from the Press Council about the difficulties that there are at a national level. Well, those difficulties can be really enhanced at an international level. So it's really quite an important issue. So we've developed, in this Journalism Trust Initiative, we've developed editorial guidelines, uniform editorial guidelines, which are drawn from the world's best newsrooms, which guarantee editorial independence, professionalism, self-regulation, transparency, and accountability. This is recognition that today there are no national solutions to what I would call the information crisis. We have to look for commonly agreed standards which will work globally, which will be recognized by journalists and news media around the world. And that's what we've sought to do by through the Journalism Trust Initiative with these trusted editorial guidelines. So the benefits of this sort of self-certification process, adherence to editorial guidelines which are universally acknowledged, is that media outlets can be independently certified and demonstrate their commitment to industry standards. And all citizens are this is made known to readers and to audience and the public, so that citizens can make informed choices about which news media to use. You can get more information about these proposals and guidelines, which were launched a couple of years ago, and I think it'd be very useful to have a look at it. I'm certainly of the view that we need to be looking today for standards which can be shared and which are recognized internationally as acceptable standards. The future of journalism, it seems to me, depends upon our strict adherence to self-regulation principles based on the defense of the core values of journalism. And those are universal standards. And I think we need to get more recognition of that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. White. I'm now asking Mrs. Novakovic to address us. Gordana, please, you may start.
Thank you. Actually, I plan to speak in English, but since we have native speakers here, I don't want to torture them. So I'll switch to Serbian and hopefully they'll provide you a professional translation. So can I speak in Serbian?
Yes, it is acceptable.
Okay. Ja nisam pripremila sad neku prezentaciju, ali htjela sam na početku, prvo hvala za priliku da pričam danas o ovoj jako važnoj temi. I prvo što sam htjela da kažem je da mi se čini kao zanimljiva koincidencija da sam poziv za učestvovanje u ovom panelu dobila prošle nedelje dok sam bila u Sarajevu na jednoj regionalnoj konferenciji na kojoj smo usvojili upravo deklaraciju koja se odnosi na jačanje medijske etike u digitalnom ekosistemu. I to je, koliko je nama poznato, prva deklaracija te vrste koju su potpisali predstavnici regulatornih tela iz ovog regiona, dakle iz jugoistočne Evrope i Turske. I ja sad neću iznositi detalje te deklaracije, mislim da ona već postoji na UNESCO-vom sajtu i može da se pročita na engleskom jeziku, ali bih htjela da kažem da ono što mi se čini važnim, da je zapravo ono rezultat dvodnevne konferencije na kojoj smo mi razgovarali upravo o stvarima o kojima danas pričamo, a to su o izazovima sa kojima su samo regulatorne tela i uopšte samo regulatorni mehanizam medijski suočeni, porastom tog sistema u kojima se razmenjuju informacije, pojavom novih formi novinarstva, onda time da se suočavamo sve češće sa činjenicom da su mediji direktno zavisni od društvenih mreža koje distribuiraju njihov materijal i naravno uvek je tema održivost samoregulatornog sistema. To je, dakle, da, imali smo i prvi ikada, ja mislim, sastanak sa predstavnicima fact-checking organizacija iz regiona, od kojih neki rade fact-checking i za Facebook i probali smo da uspostavimo nekakav kontakt i eventualno neku buduću saradnju, pošto je bilo dosta primetbi medija, ne samo iz regiona koliko znam, na zapravo metodologiju i način rada ovih organizacija i nekako pokušavamo da uskladimo standarde u ocenjivanju onoga što su lažne vesti. Rezultat cele ove diskusije je to da se u deklaraciji inače pozivaju predstavnici društvenih mreža da omoguće, nadamo se, poseban žalbeni mehanizam za medije čiji sadržaj se blokira ili uklanja sa društvenih mreža, a za koje oni smatraju da je u skladu sa lokalnim etičkim kodeksem novinara. I to je problem koji je primećen ne samo u ovom regionu, nego zapravo mnogo više od strane kolega u nekim drugim evropskim zemljama u kojima je samoregulatorni sistem mnogo razvijeniji i mnogo stariji. I prosto ovakav stav je negde u skladu sa onim što je Alliance of the Independent Press Councils of Europe, organizacija čiji smo mi član, zauzela, a to je da bi samoregulacija i mehanizmi medijske samoregulacije morali uvek da imaju prednost odnosno na eksternu regulaciju bilo kog urednički oblikovanog, odnosno novinarskog sadržaja. Ja očekujem komentar od nekih učesnika na ovo, ali to je ono o čemu smo pričali. I sad zašto sam počela sa ovim? Zato što želim da ukažem na to da smo mi, kad kažem mi, mislim na predstavnike zapravo Saveta za štampu, odnosno samoregulatornih tela, zaista više nego svesni svih promena koje se dešavaju u medijskoj sferi i pokušavamo da se nekako prilagodimo na to, što nije lako. Mnogo toga se promenilo za vrlo kratko vreme i na mnoge stvari moramo da odgovorimo. Ja ću navesti kao primer naš Savet za štampu koji je jedan od najmlađih u Evropi zapravo, nije otprilike tako star kao saveti u recimo Norveškoj, Švedskoj, pa i u Velikoj Britaniji, ali pre 12 godina kad smo mi smo osnovani kao Savet za štampu i to je to, znači odnosilo se samo na štampane medije i već posle godinu dana rada smo morali da proširimo nadležnost na online medije, na zahtev nekoliko zapravo online medija koji su želeli da uđu u sistem samoregulacije, a nisu hteli da osnivaju novo samoregulatorno telo i onda su se obratili nama. I zapravo sve vreme tih poslednjih 10 godina mi prolazimo kroz nekakav proces transformacije pokušavajući da odgovorimo na sve ono što se dešava okolo. I evo sad moram i da se pohvalim, mi smo vjerojatno jedan od prvih saveta za štampu koji je uradio i posebne smjernice za primjenu kodeksa novinara u online medijima i to smo uradili još pre 5 godina, verujući da zapravo shvaćaš i da postoje nekakve specifičnosti u toj sferi koje kodeks novinara Srbije nije mogao da pokrije, odnosno da ima dosta nedoumica i kod novinara i urednika, a i u našoj komisiji za žalbe kad treba da odlučujemo o takvim slučajevima, pa smo onda prosto morali da to probamo da odgovorimo na ta neka pitanja i to je jedan tada dosta detaljno urađen dokument koji je davao instrukcije koje su se odnosile na recimo user generated content, znači na moderaciju komentara, na preuzimanje sadržaja sa društvenih mreža, na pravo na zaborav, dakle na sve, na upotrebu meta podataka, dakle na sve one stvari koje ovaj kodeks onda kada je napravljen nije mogao ni da pretpostavi da će se desiti da u medijima. I sada upravo radimo dopunu tih smernica koja je jedan deo toga, odnosno veći deo toga se odnosi na upotrebu veštačke inteligencije u pripremi vesti. Tako da, kako kažem, nije sve to lako ispratiti, ali eto nekako pokušavamo da se prilagodimo svemu tome. Sad, koliko to sve, sav taj naš trud ima efekta i koliko kakav je rezultat toga, pa moram da priznam da to jeste, sve ovo što smo mi radili jeste dovelo do povećanja broja žalbi na sadržaje, ne samo online, nego uopšte medija. Da, inače, zaboravila sam da kažem, mi sada i već posljednjih par godina zapravo više od 80% žalbi koje dobijamo godišnje se odnosi na sadržaje koje su dostupni online. Dakle, broj žalbi jeste povećan, negde svest o tome da ti standardi etički moraju da se primenjuju i u online medijima su takođe, uspeli smo da to nekako postignemo, ali ono što je problem je što je broj prekršaja tamo čak i veći nego od onoga što imamo u štampanim medijima, broj prekršaja, mislim, kodeksa, jel? Dakle, implementacija tih etičkih standarda je lošija zapravo u online medijima, čini mi se, mada su nama i štampani mediji jako loši. Mi smo radili prošle godine, i evo samo ću to pomenuti ukratko, prošle godine smo radili jedan pilot projekat monitoring 6 najposećenijih portala na prekršaje kodeksa novinara i ovih smernica o kojima sam pričala, i za 3 meseca je zabeleženo skoro 3000 prekršaja u tih 6 medija. I to, ono što celu stvar čini gorom je da je reč o periodu od početka aprila do kraja juna prošle godine, što je zapravo period lockdowna, gde su ljudi bili usmereni uglavnom gde su primali informacije upravo uglavnom preko ovih online medija. Ali da se vratim na to da li su ti etički principi koji se sadrže kodeksi, klasični kodeksi, novinarski, ako su uspostavljeni valjda u prošlom veku svi, da li su primenjivi na online medije? Da, u velikoj meri, bar naše iskustvo je takvo, jer ono što mi vidimo i kroz taj monitoring, kroz žalbe koje dobijemo, da se najveći broj žalbi odnosi na prvo poglavlje tog kodeksa, dakle na istinitost izveštavanja, odmah nakon toga na nepoštovanje privatnosti, i to je upravo ono što imamo i u štampanim medijima, tako da ne vidimo neku bitnu razliku, sem što češće online mediji krše kodeks. Eto, to toliko za početak, pa naravno spremna sam da govorim na pitanje.
Hvala, Gordana. Thank you, Gordana. And finally, may I call Isabelle de Courson to give us her speech now.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really delighted to participate in this conference. I think that my contribution will be probably a bit more pragmatical than the others. I intend basically to talk about our experience at Hola and Hello magazine, and kind of explain our practice in terms of deontology and the values that we're trying to defend in our media group. First, I would like to introduce myself and just explain that I'm editorial director of Hola, Hola, who is the mother company of Hello magazine. So it's a Spanish-based company. And I've been working in this company for 23 years and in charge of the international expansion of the group. So in charge of kind of transmitting and sharing the values of the company with all the new license that are joining our media network. So as I was saying, Hola is a Spanish company that was founded in 1944. And it's a family business. And I think it's a very important information because it's certainly one of the reasons why from the beginning, our group has been driven by very strong values. It has been founded by Antonio Sanchez, who was a journalist, and he had a very clear vision of what he wanted to do with this magazine when he created it. And his idea was to offer entertainment, but mixed with rigorous journalism. And in his mind, elegance was not only an aesthetical value that he wanted to apply in his magazine, but also it was a moral value. It was a way to understand the world and to approach the news with a positive, respectful, and a kind vision of the news. And we have the magazine have always been based and following his vision to celebrate, not to judge, to have always a very respectful approach on any single information that we publish. And I think that this strong deontological motto that we have, as even if we're of course we're in the entertainment industry, we are talking about celebrities, about royals. We are offering escapism, dream. Our magazines are very aspirational. We're not. We're in talking about the bright side of life, of human interest stories. So it's maybe a very light type of content, but it doesn't prevent us from following very strict deontological rules and to try every day in our work to stick to the truth, to provide reliable information, to make sure that we're going to publish information that is not going to prejudice anyone, that is not going to offend, that is not going to shock. And so from the beginning, we have been following some guidelines, and we have some guidelines that we are giving to our journalists to help them to make a smart, responsible, ethical choices to produce the most honest, the most entertaining, the most aspirational, heartwarming content. But yes, with a quality content on which the readers can rely. So we have always worked following some guidelines, making sure that of course our stories are based on facts, not on judgments or on comments. As we often say, we're here to tell stories, but we're not part of the stories. We are the stagehand, but we're not the stars. So we just make sure that we are providing facts and not opinions to our readers. So checking the facts, we have several filters of reading to make sure that the information is true, is correct, that we offer the most accurate information to our readers. We of course try to verify the source, if possible. Always talk directly to the person that is at the center of the story that we are telling. We are questioning ourselves and to make sure that we have no conflict of interest when we're producing a story. So we use information that comes from sources that we can verify, that we know. Like in most of the cases, what we're doing is to talk directly to the celebrity, to the personalities, and I think that the long history of the company and of the group has enabled us to build a strong and close relationship with celebrities, with royals. So definitely we can offer information from directly from the people who are in the news, and I think that this is something that the readers recognize from Hola and Hello. This is the amount of exclusive content that we are able to offer. Also, we're always trying to have a very considerate, a very comprehensive, a very benevolent approach of everything. We will avoid everything that is polemical, that is that can be conflictive, or can even offend part of our readers. And ultimately, I guess that we're always paraphrasing Socrates, and we're always asking ourselves when we're going to run a news, is it true? Is it necessary or interesting? And is it kind? Because I think that one of the strongest value in this company is indeed kindness, and it's this kind of positive and very thoughtful approach of the information that we are delivering. So this is something that we have always put in practice in our magazine. When the digital disruption happened, it didn't really change anything in our professional approach. We have applied the same kind of rules to our digital platforms, but certainly it has kind of forced us to be more exigent with ourselves and to reinforce our best practice. So we have provided some guidelines to our writers, making sure that it was very clear for all of them that we had to follow a kind of checklist to make sure that we were delivering reliable information to our readers. Because definitely what we notice is, suddenly a lot of new medias appearing on the market, a lot of new competition, and a lot of new different sources that were definitely also trying to have were competing with us in this market, which is a very attractive market. Celebrity news is definitely something that is generating a lot of traffic. So we have suddenly have to compete against a lot of medias, and everybody was trying to offer the most sensational information. So in our sector, we have noticed an increasement of fake news, an increasement of also yes, a lot of more fake news, and a lot of people commenting, much more medias that were offering comments, and sometimes a very negative, a very cynical approach of all the entertainment industry and all the celebrity and royal news that we had been expert for so many years. Also, well, the second thing that we have noticed is of course, well, the direct participation of users in this in this industry and in this type of information, which is like definitely something that we we have appreciated, and also that has kind of forced us to be even more exigent with ourselves regarding the kind of information that we were publishing, to make sure that what we were saying was true, was reliable. Because anytime that we were making a little mistake, well, there was a lot of readers, users reacting on social media to correct the information. So definitely, well, this is something that we have accepted, and that we are definitely appreciating, in the sense that it helps us to produce better content. But at the same time, and as Aidan was mentioning before, what we have noticed with the digital disruption is an increasement of hate speech. We're talking about celebrities, and they generally have a lot of fans, and a lot of people who like them, but also a lot of people who don't like them. And what we have noticed, and probably, I mean, this is not adjusting to what Kathleen said before, because our experience is that on social media, we have noticed a very strong polarization of the comments that we were seeing against or for some of the celebrities, and to a point where we were questioning how to until what limit we could accept to have those kind of comments coming in, because there was a hate speech that was definitely not acceptable in some cases, related to some personalities and to some news. And in 2019, our concern resonated with a comment that we received from Kensington Palace, the residence of Prince William and Prince Harry at the time. And they mentioned to us that they were really struggling and spending a lot of time trying to moderate the comments that the sexist, racist, and sometimes extremely aggressive comments that they were receiving. on the accounts of the Dukes of Cambridge and the Dukes of Sussex, and they were noticing a very strong polarization. Like there was kind of in the comments they were receiving, they were noticing that people were trying to oppose Kate Middleton and Meghan Markle, and there was how to say, a very strong polarization of the people who were commenting on their platforms. And this comment that we could definitely understand, and that we were also perceiving on our social media, kind of led us to make a stand and to champion an initiative that we have called Hello to Kindness. And so since 2019, we are trying to promote a very kind approach. We are really making a stand against any kind of abusive speech, any negative, mean comments. And we are also trying to highlight experiences that are going to promote, let's say, a positive approach of the news. So we have we have created on our website a kind of microsite dedicated to that kind of positive examples, but also of comments and some videos that are coming from celebrities who are joining this initiative and trying to promote a kind of a more kind, a more benevolent approach of the news, and more consideration for what can be the situation of every people, not criticize them, but have a more comprehensive approach of the situation, the problems anyone can be facing. And last year, we even organized a kindness summit, a webinar where we invited a lot of personality, the Duchess of York and other British celebrities to contribute and to speak about what impact kindness can have on mental health, and some advices on how to have a kind and positive approach and attitude in general in life. So this is our small contribution to try to how to say run away from the hate speech on social media, and it's also a way for us to be true to the mission that our founders, the founders of Hola and Hello, had in mind to produce a media that was that had a very how to say a positive and respectful approach of the news. And yeah, I think that's probably for now what I could say about our ethical practice.
Thank you, Isabel. Now we are turning to this discussion part of this workshop. I'm hoping that we will get some questions and that I will get them through. Also, the questions from the audience. But let's start with the questions I prepared. The public space that we know, in the past at least, it was bordered or limited by the laws of the state in which the media was registered. You have to obey those laws. But the digital public space is actually under control of the tech companies and their rules, and that is not necessarily the same as the law of my own country, where I'm practicing my journalism. So, can we talk about media without presence of tech companies? Maybe I can start with Isabel to answer that question. What do you think?
That's a hard one. Well, definitely. I mean, I must say that we are submitted, and they are kind of formatting the kind of information and the kind of news that we can do. And what we are trying to, I mean, like it's definitely impossible. It's impossible for us to currently work without those platforms and in our case, I would say that probably the kind of content that we are publishing is maybe less compromising than we're not talking about politics. We're not talking about anything that is kind of polemical information. This is something like definitely much lighter, the kind of content that we are publishing, and certainly we are seeing less limits in the way that we can deliver the information. But what can I say? I mean,
yeah, but you have a global market. I mean, in the past you had only to obey to the market of the state where you're publishing. Now the market is global. Anybody can say. I see that Caitlin is.
No. Can I?
Okay, sorry, Aidan first.
Yeah, I mean, look. First of all, I to answer your question directly, no, we cannot turn the clock back. Nobody wants to go back. Nobody wants to go back to the sort of communications landscape that we used to have. What we have now is a liberated landscape, the capacity for individuals and the public to communicate with each other in a way they could never do so before, to be able to share information, to show more solidarity, to be together in a way which was previously unheard of. So nobody would want to go back. But what we want to do is we want to put in place safeguards that protect our values, protect the fact that we are gregarious human beings, that we have majorities and minorities, we have people who are vulnerable, we have people who in our societies who are to be treated with respect and care. And so and one of the reasons why media were put under control pre the internet was because centers of power wanted to maintain control on information. That was always the case. That has gone, and I think that's a very important thing. But there are some elements of legal protection for people in an open information landscape which are necessary to protect. We need to protect our children. We need to protect vulnerable people from access to images which are explicit and disturbing. We have to make sure our information landscape is not polluted by propaganda, in which centers of power seek to use information in order to promote discord or conflict. And we have to avoid, as Isabel was talking about, hate speech and so on. And actually, we do need law to protect ourselves. The fact of the matter is the tech companies are not bound by law in terms of the way that they operate according to their content. They're bound by national law in the areas in which they operate, but they have taken it upon themselves to promote a business model which unfortunately leads to the proliferation of content which tears down the cordon sanitaire, which has been erected within societies to protect our most vulnerable people. And I think that's unacceptable. And I think the fact that the tech companies have absolutely failed to take responsibility for this and to acknowledge the contribution they've made to the deterioration of our information space is reprehensible. but that's changing. That's changing because they're being forced to change. But to answer your question directly, no, nobody wants to go back. Nobody wants to return to what we had before. But what we want to do is to move forward into a much safer, trusted space.
Okay, but my question was not really that. My question was, can we talk about media without tech companies being present? That was the question.
No,
okay,
can
I?
Of course not. That's what I mean. Because to talk about media companies without tech companies being present would be going backwards.
Okay, Caitlin.
I'm not sure if you want me to answer that question or to
I want you. Well, the first thing is, I mean, do you feel comfortable being in the same workshop with media, talking about media and coming from tech? I mean, I know your career is different, but now you're in this role. I'm considering you just as a representative of a tech company now.
Yes, and I think the thing is that for years, Meta, previously Facebook, has been advocating for regulation and has been advocating for regulatory codes, because these issues that we talk about are whole of society issues. And if, we created the community standards, but the community standards in themselves are not enough. And although the community standards set out what is acceptable, what's not acceptable on the platforms, and it goes through a process of we have processes to kind of enforce that within the platforms, that in themselves is not enough. So we have been advocating for these codes and these regulations for years. So I'm kind of comfortable being in that space. I'm a little uncomfortable with some of the mischaracterization, but that is also to be expected. And that's partly because, we have to do more on being transparent about how the algorithm works, and we recognize that. And there's a lot of that to unpack in order for it to make sense to people, actually. But you had a thing about we don't have to abide by laws in which we don't operate. That's not actually true. We don't go into countries and not abide by the law. We abide by local laws, except in those cases where local laws are in direct conflict with international human rights laws. And in those cases, we will very often enter into discussions with those local governments and explain why there is a conflict there, and then work on kind of how the products can work in those environments. But it's not a case that we don't abide by local laws, even if we're established in. So we have different centres of establishment. So in Europe, we're established in Ireland, and in America, obviously, we're established in Menlo Park. But it's not like we go, we're established in Menlo Park and the rules of California apply. That's not what happens. But what we do is we look at that international human rights laws, because that is the only kind of global standard that there is. And sometimes, and this went to Adrian's point, governments, with the control of the media, would try and do things that or try and control the media in order to control power. And there are times when governments try to do things that are in direct conflict with human rights, and then we will not do those things. But I can't think of specific examples because that's a bit outside of my area.
Gordana, the microphone.
Pa, ja se zapravo saglasna sam sa Edinom potpuno i da, ne možemo da se vraćamo nazad, ali s druge strane moraju da postoje nekakva pravila koja bi regulisala ovu oblast. Nisam sklona da, i to je u stvari ono o čemu sam i pričala, te nekakve tenzije koje sada jesu vidljive između medija i društvenih mreža od kojih mediji nažalost zavise danas u velikoj meri i nekako im jesu u izvesnom smislu određeni. I ne bih mogla baš da se saglasim sa ovim da se društvene mreže, dakle Facebook konkretno, drže lokalnih zakona i da se poštuju tu vrstu pravila. Tako da, ne znam, teško je, kako bih rekla, mislim, moramo da pokušamo da nekako nađemo neko kompromisno rešenje, da prosto, meni se čini da ovako kakva je sada situacija, da su mediji, mislim na tradicionalne medije, dakle koji koriste društvene mreže u podređenom položaju i da zapravo u velikoj meri zavise od dobre volje kompanija koje su vlasnici toga.
So the question is also, in what way has are media in digital space allowed or have more freedom, as Aidan was saying? I mean, did we got much more space and much more freedom through digital media? Now this freedom is, or however do you want to call it, it doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing all the time, but now it is spilling over to traditional media and changing the traditional media in a serious manner. Aidan, what would you say? What changes do you appreciate? What changes do you don't like? Microphone, please, microphone.
I like all the changes on the whole. I mean, I think that media are now more accessible. Media can respond to their audience. Their audience can comment on what media are talking about and so on. But the information space that we're dealing with, the wider information space, is so polluted, so polarized, that it's very, very difficult for media to talk through the chaos and the noise of the internet in order to get their messages out. So, for example, a lot of media, when they publish their stories, whether they broadcast their stories, they will allow online comments to be made on their stories. And that's a very good thing, because reader feedback, audience feedback is very important. That's a very good thing. So it's part of that democratization of journalism, which we've talked about, which I think is a really positive process. But actually, because of the abusive nature of a lot of the content, which is being promoted by the tech companies, despite what Kathleen says, it's absolutely complacent of her to talk about, we have been for years talking about codes and guidelines, when there is absolutely ample evidence of terrible abuse that's going on online, which is not being properly corrected by the tech companies.
Yeah, but if I may, Aidan, I have interruption. I mean, for example, on our website, which in the path of with the comments, which is absolutely not under the control of any tech companies, we are getting all those kinds of abusive messages anyway.
But I absolutely agree. That's the point. So if you'd let me finish the point I was making, we have the capacity to engage with the audience, but because of the abusive nature of the landscape, we have to control that. So we can't have a free-for-all. So, for example, any newspaper or broadcasting institution with a reputation, when it does a story on the Israeli-Palestine conflict, will not open that story to comment. And they will not do so for a very simple reason. They know that they will be subject to an avalanche of potentially abusive, unacceptable comment coming from that wider information landscape. So media are having to deal with their wish to try to have discourse which is rational, ethical, and respectful, and the reality that giving access to online, free access to online participation can and often will destroy the quality of the story that's being told. No, that's a reality. That's one of the problems that media are having to deal with all the time.
Isabel, before I give the word to Kate and also to react on this, in what way was your work affected or changed by the fact that you now have, I mean, that you are also publishing on digital media, not on digital media, but on social networks? I mean, what kind of reaction you got from there?
From social media, and well, I mean, and that's what I was explaining before, and definitely it goes in the same direction of what Aidan has just said, is something now that we have to take with a lot of care. Of course, we appreciate the feedback from our readers, our users, and definitely this is something that helps us to grow, to improve the story, to and have this sense, to feel the pulse of our readers. But the problem is, in many cases, because I think that we're talking about people who are about celebrities, about people who are very much in the center of the stage, and people who are provoking different kind of reaction, impressions. People love some celebrities and others can't suffer them, and the problem is social media. Through social media, we're receiving a huge amount of comments that are very often going totally off the roads, are unacceptable, are really mean, and this is something that is kind of forcing us in many occasions of what Aidan was saying before. We have to give up and we have to renounce to have to open the comments on social media, to avoid this hate speech and to avoid this kind of comments that are really of all kind, sexist, racist, very sometimes extremely aggressive against some personalities that are in the news. So definitely, well, social media is really helpful for us to have a kind of much more direct contact, a kind of immediate reaction from our readers, but to a certain extent, and we have to be extremely careful. And part of this initiative that we are taking to try to keep a very kind and a very positive speech in general kind of forces us to limit and to stop this possibility to receive comments, because indeed, I think that maybe users are, there is a lack of rules, there is a lack of coaching on how to comment and to participate to a general conversation, and that's what we're trying also to do, to educate or lead by example, let's say, and show how it should be done, or it could be done with a constructive contribution to the general and open conversation.
Yeah, but if I ask you, I mean, if you compare, you said you're at Ola for 23 years. If you compare the situation 20 years ago, without all this knowledge on the comments, without all this information that you have now, do you think that you are becoming more responsible because you have to think about consequences in a different way than it was 20 years ago?
I want to believe that we have always been very careful with what we were saying, and with the information that we are publishing, and we have always really committed to be committed to the truth and to reliable information, and it has been part of the credibility of the magazine. I think that for us, publishing wrong information, rumors, or news that are not that don't adjust to the truth, there is an immediate sanction to that. It's just the readers would stop buying the magazine, but celebrities would stop to come to us and give us interview, give us an exclusive approach approach. So we have always been very careful. I think that so of course now we are much more aware, and definitely when we are going to publish, but because we are publishing more information with the internet and our website, we are producing a much bigger volume of information. So it kind of forces us to be indeed very careful, to have this kind of filters we really filter the information to make sure that we're delivering correct information. But and definitely, because yes, we know that if we make a mistake, we will immediately receive a comment and say, you said she was married to this person, and this is not true. They never got married, and we have the proof that there is no wedding certificate. I mean, we're receiving this kind of comment. We have very we have users that are expert in some. We always have an expert in some area, on a celebrity, on a kind of event. So definitely, we're receiving much more comments and much more accurate feedback on what we are publishing. So it has forced us to change and to improve our practice. But I think that, like, yeah, in the past we were publishing a smaller amount, let's say, of content, and we have always been committed with the truth and accuracy.
Yeah, Caitlin, it seems you, I mean, from what we heard from Isabel, you forced us to improve, because now we have all these instant reactions, so we can see when we are mistaken. So I can say we do like social media, but we also want you to improve in many ways. So how are you going to do that? Can you reassure us that this is an ongoing process?
Oh, it's absolutely an ongoing process. So one of, I think, the many things in this kind of changing landscape that we have whenever we do work. So you say you have product development and you go through all the processes trying to think of all the trust and safety issues that may happen in that. You then have a governance process to ensure it's like in the rules and the standards, that users are informed. You have an enforcement process to enforce the guidelines and the rules. And you know, one of the things when I'm hearing about the abusive messages and comments, at this point in time, we are able to get 98% of the hate speech down through technological means, which means it comes down before it's even posted. That's 98%.
So you want to say,
and it's still not enough.
You want to say what we see is only 2%?
Huh?
You want to say that what we see now, and it is overwhelming, is only 2%?
That's correct.
So it is 50 times more than what we see.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And we penalize repeat offenders and you know, by either giving them short-term or long-term bans from their accounts. But in that whole process, there is this kind of continuation and a commitment to how do we improve and feed that back into the cycle of how we develop the products. This is why we spend the money that we do on research. This is why we engage with academics, with civil society, and kind of communities at large, is we're absolutely committed to a cycle of continuous improvement. Because the landscape is changing so fast, we also have to continuously improve quickly. And I would absolutely agree that there's more to do. And that was part of my kind of highlighting the different codes that are out there. There seems to be both kind of industry, government, civil society push, particularly in the last 2 years, to really get the structures in place to allow that to happen and to allow us to learn from each other, which is absolutely essential to any solution that will work.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Gordana, the traditional ethical principles were created, I could easily say, through centuries, more than one century for sure. And now are they, because of the digital...
At the end of the 19th century.
But are they sufficient to some changes or adjustment because of the digital media now?
Well, that's a question still haven't been answered, I think. But I think the basic principles are sufficient because I've already mentioned that according to our monitoring of the online media, the breaches of code that they've been made are more or less the same as in the traditional media. So we tried with these guidelines we create to adapt the code of ethics to some specifics of the online media outlets, but the basic principle, I think they are acceptable to all media outlets.
Aidan, what would you say about, we were creating, and your whole career, you were trying to work in these ethical principles. I'm sure about that. And now, do you think that we need some adjustment because of the digital media and all the changes that they introduced?
No, I don't. The reason I formed and launched the Ethical Journalism Network 10 years ago was because, and there has not existed before, an international organization dedicated to ethics in media. And the reason that was done was because of the media crisis that was overwhelming traditional media. The whole question of ethical standards was falling off the agenda of traditional media. And I realized, and we realized, that there is a need for media to get back to the basic standards that were formulated about 100 years ago. The very first code of conduct was put together, I think, in Sweden. There are today about 400 codes of conduct around the world, and all of them are very different. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long, but all of them boil down to the same 5 core values: accuracy and fact-based communication, editorial independence, humanity, respect for the audience, and honesty in the way that you work, impartiality in the processes that you use to get your stories, and above all, accountability and transparency, so that you correct your mistakes and you provide remedies for the people that you have offended. Those values apply equally strongly today, if not more so, in the digital environment. Of course, we need to adopt new guidelines, editorial guidelines, because the tools we use to get our information and to publish our information have changed. And because they've changed, we need to work in a different way. And that's the technical changes in the way we work mean there are changes. But in terms of changing the ethical base on which journalism as public purpose information is made available, there's no need for any change at all. Those ethical values remain as strong today as they did 100 years ago. And unfortunately, today they are still as distant from universal acceptance and endorsement and put into practice.
But may I interrupt you just for a second? There are people who have like millions of followers, more than regular media, more than traditional media. We're talking about the number of followers on digital media. So would you consider them as media because they are spreading the news? And how would you make them obey the ethical standards of journalism? Is that possible at all?
It's very important to understand that people who are engaged in journalism are quite different from people who are exercising freedom of expression in the public information landscape. These are different people. People in journalism have a very specific purpose. Their purpose is to gather, transmit, and publish information in the public interest. And they have to take account of the interests of others. They have to worry about what are the consequences of what we publish for our audience. So that's the purpose of journalism. That's why the word journalism exists. It exists to say that we publish information in a framework of values The people you're talking about who've got followers and so on, they don't have any framework of values at all. They can say what the hell they want. They've got lots of followers, that's true, but they can tell lies, they can tell untruths, they don't have to make themselves accountable, they don't have to show humanity, they don't have to be accountable at all. That's the spirit of freedom of expression. And actually, it's one I support, because we all need to live with the fact that people have different opinions and have the right to express them. But journalism is different. And I would not for 1 second allow the people who've got 20 million followers. I wouldn't allow Donald Trump to become regard himself as a journalist. I mean, if we begin to boil journalism down to the number of followers you've got, it seems to me that is a very despairing thing to do. Journalism has purpose. It's the public interest. People who have got lots of Twitter followers and are competing for more Twitter followers are only interested in self-interest, not the public interest. That's a big and important difference.
Okay, I have a question for Caitlin. Can there be any guarantee that Meta will no longer conduct experiments in Balkans and they're going to abolish the so-called news feed? I mean, not only in Balkans, I think that those experiments were worldwide.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I mean, are you going to do any experiments with your news feed in order to, when you're working on your algorithm? So I think that was basically the idea of the question.
Okay, so the news feed itself is, the way the news feed works is the news feed is designed for you to have information from content that you are connected to. So primarily it was designed for you to get information from your friends and your family. As it has, the product has evolved, people have joined groups, they follow newspapers, and all of these things end up into your newsfeed. The newsfeed itself has, for an average person, has about 3,000 pieces of content a day that it could present to you. And this is done through the use of the algorithm. And there's a huge misunderstanding, I think, about how the algorithm works. But what the algorithm does is it looks at what you are interested in with your family, with your friends, and it kind of gives an order to that. We do research, we do changes to the algorithm. So I think one of the things that has been mischaracterized was the meaningful social interactions change, which actually was a change that reduced the number of viral videos and increased content from friends and family. And we did that even though the research suggested that people would spend less time on Facebook. But it also suggested it was better for people's well-being. So it's not experiments as such, but the landscape is continually evolving. And so when research suggests that we should do something or do something to change, we will. And I can see Aidan saying it's misunderstood because it's how it's maintained or operated. It's also misunderstood because we don't publish enough information about how it works. And we have been working this year on publishing more information about how it works, and that is a continuous process, and there will be more information about how the algorithm works through tools like, why am I seeing this, so that people can actually click and understand why is this piece of content in my newsfeed. But also, and I think this is something to be mindful, is that bad actors, when they understand how things work, can try and game the system, and then we have to respond to the bad actors. So it's not experiments on the newsfeed as such. It's a kind of continuation, an iterative process on improving the algorithm, largely with a function to ensuring safety on the platform. That is the main driver to changing the algorithm. And, we are, as I say, we're working on more transparency, and then we are going to be required in Europe to do more transparency with the algorithm anyway when the DSA comes in. And that will also give us a nice framework to like what we should be publishing, because I think there is a bit of like, what should we, what shouldn't we publish, and in terms of how the algorithm works, because of the concern of bad actors gaming the system. But yeah. I don't know if I answered your question or
generally we understood. I mean, the general answers. Isabel, what principles of self-regulation in ethics withstand the changes of market influenced by clicks, shares, and likes, which are bringing the highest profit? I mean, can we keep on being what we are? I mean, with this changed business model on the other side, when the owners of the media are saying, well, you can do better because we can make more money if we publish this and that, and we see what gets most of the likes. And well, antagonisms always get plenty of likes. So how do you defend your ethics with this on the other side, with this challenge?
Well, definitely. I mean, of course, we are definitely influenced by all the information and that we are receiving on what works, what doesn't work online, what kind of celebrity is trendy at some point at some point and no longer at some point, and definitely it has an influence in the kind of information that we are producing. But when we are producing the information, we're still following the same rules and the same kind of journalistic practice that we are always doing for a story. So yes. Definitely, it has an incidence on the kind of content that we are going to be interested. But news are always news, and what is in the news, even if some celebrity is not trendy at the moment, we will still cover it because it's our mission. It's to deliver the widest range of information. So I would say that it has an influence, definitely, but not not necessarily on the way we are going to produce the content. We are not.
You wouldn't say it is harming your ethical principles.
That is harming our. It's influencing it. Like definitely. I mean, like to be honest. Of course. Well, I'm trying to. I'm trying to think about when there was. This split in the royal family, and Harry and Meghan were had decided to leave the royal family and make a new life in the United States. Definitely, I mean, there was a huge interest in them when they were in the news. Like there was a huge interest on that, and it was definitely driving our content and the amount of story that we were producing, and probably in some way putting a shade on other celebrities and other personalities because they were not so in the trendy news at this moment. But I think we're still fulfilling our mission, which is to concentrate on news and deliver our perspective on the information, which is what people are coming to us because we have a special voice, we have a special vision of information that is Hello is more, let's say, comprehensive, thoughtful with celebrities and so yes, we're influenced by this kind of the data information and all the information that we can get on traffic and what works and what doesn't work. but I don't think that it's changing our professional approach and the way that we're producing the information and the content.
Thank you. We're at the very end. We have like 5 minutes. I wanted to ask Aidan one more question, a little bit of introspection. I believe that you learned your ethical standards and everything you know in the newsroom. What with the present generations? Are they learning those ethical principles in the newsroom or in digital media? Who are their mentors these days? And I want you to be quite honest with that.
Look, one of the great things about being older is that I've been able to spend more time talking to young people and young people who want to get into journalism. And I'm cheered by two facts. First of all, that there are lots and lots of young people who want to do journalism, and they want to do journalism for the right reasons. They see it as a public interest. They see it as a public service, and that's really important. And they do so even though it's, as you know, not a very well-paid job these days. In fact, it's a very low-paid job. The working conditions of journalists have deteriorated dramatically in recent times. But the second thing that cheers me up is not only that they want to be a journalist, but actually they have a very strong moral commitment, and that they see ethics as being an extremely important part of it. One of the really good things is that the journalism schools of Europe are bulging. There are plenty of people who want to be journalists. So I'm quite optimistic about the situation. I know that it's hard to get into journalism. But what I always say to young people is, you may have to do 2 or 3 different jobs doing their various things. But if you're doing journalism, stick to journalism and always be ethical. The most important thing in this whole discussion, I believe in the end, is about building trust, build public trust. And I don't think you can build public trust unless you're honest and open and transparent and ethical in the way that you work. When you do that, when people know that you're honest, they'll follow you and they'll buy your products. If you rely on being told by the government what to do and having laws drag you into line, then I think you lose trust. So I think media and journalism is in a good space for the future.
I'll take this as your conclusion on today's workshop because it's a good one. But Isabel, can you give me a one-sentence conclusion? Like, what would you like us to remember from what you were speaking, if it can get into one sentence?
Oof, that's hard to say, but I think that ethical values are definitely a guarantee of credibility. So definitely, I mean, I think that we should really advocate to and encourage medias to really stick to very general the rules that Aidan kind of identified previously. But I think that for our credibility and the credibility of medias in general, that would be very necessary for all of us.
Okay, Gordon, if you're still with us, can I ask you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. What would be your conclusion? Yeah. One sentence conclusion.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I need to be somewhere else in 2 minutes, so I'm afraid I will leave you now because the another panel I have is not online, so I have to go. No special conclusions. I think that everything has been said, and no, I have nothing to add.
Okay, Caitlin, how would you conclude? One sentence.
I think I would sum up so saying that I don't believe private companies should make all the decisions on their own, and the society-wide problems will need society collaboration to get to their conclusion.
Thank you. Many thanks to all speakers and media representatives gathered here, and for a great discussion that we had on the topic of ethics and values in the digital age. And I wish you all the nice day, if I may say it that way. And thank you really for this discussion. It was very helpful, and I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.